L&D Trends is important, and we may be slightly late in the year. February, goodness me, you know, we're already 1/12, in fact, we're almost 2/12 of the way into the year, aren't we? So is it a bit late? Well, actually, it's not. I like to look at trends at two levels. As John said, I don't actually do much these days. I started off standing up as a trainer in the 1980s. Since then, I've been through developing courses, delivering courses, project management, sales, marketing, every form of operations, setting up and selling companies a couple of times. I'm now in the position where I'm able to sit back and look at the broad scope of what's happened in our industry since I started as a trainer. Well, actually, I started as a computer programmer in the 80s, then I moved to being a trainer in the late 80s. And the changes have been enormous. So I tend to look at it from quite a large perspective. So although the topic is trends in 2014, I want to look at some big picture stuff and then drill down to what does this mean for us this year. That's why it doesn't really matter that it's the end of February now. The fact is that some of these trends we're going to be talking about are going to in fact affect what we do, not just now, but next year and the year after. We are really in the middle of what I'd say is a revolution in learning and development. And there are some great things about that, some great opportunities, great things we can do. It's also slightly scary. We'll look back at 2015 and we'll say, my word, that was a fantastic time to be in our profession. There was so much going on. We made so many fantastic changes. But at the time, when you're involved in a revolution, all you see are the individual skirmishes, the battles, the street fights, and it's a bit difficult to pick out the wood from the trees. So what I'm going to do is set the big picture and then drill down a bit into what are the things we need to be looking out for this year. Okay? I never like to talk too long myself, because then we all get into that comfortable feeling, oh yeah, he's going to talk, and I can sit back and let my mind wander. It's not actually a bad thing. Sometimes letting your mind wander is quite a good thing, especially if I'm talking. But sometimes what you want to do is to actually engage with other people, have a conversation. Let's make sure that if we're having a conversation, we're having it with people in the room and the people outside the room as well. So our hashtags, we've got two hashtags for the event, Rebriefing and LD Trends. And the rest of the contact information there is for, of course, Reed Learning. Reed Learning, great branding. They are just the same thing across all platforms. By the way, I'm the same. I've almost given up giving out business cards. Now, if you want to be in touch with me, just do the same thing, but instead of Reed Learning, put Donald H. Taylor. It's the same thing, Gmail, LinkedIn, Twitter, everything. Okay, so revolution, big trends, small things going on as well. I'd like to ask you a question, and I'd like you to discuss this with the person sitting next to you. And of course, if you've come with somebody you know, and there's somebody next to you you don't know, who are you going to turn to? The person you don't know, just in case there's any doubt. Make a new friend, have a discussion. The question I'd like you to answer is, what trends are you seeing? And I'm not framing this. So you could say, 3 months is my time span, I've got a trend going on here. Or you could say, 30 years. What trends are you seeing? Discuss with your newfound friend for 2 minutes, please. Go ahead. All right, what trends do we have? What thoughts do we have about what's happening in L&D? Any thoughts? Everyone was talking very, very loquaciously, bubbling along there. I'm sure there's lots of stuff to share.
Much more of a move to sort of on-demand learning, online learning, YouTube.
On-demand, so lots of things there. On-demand, online, and YouTube. So that's video, but video is not an hour long, is it? Short, snappy, 5, 10 minutes. Okay. On-demand, online, YouTube, wanting it now. Social as opposed to formal?
Yeah, and using a networking group like today.
Yep.
Online.
Yeah, face-to-face like we're doing now, talking, learning from each other, which actually is great, and I'd love to try to facilitate that as much as possible, or indeed online, and not just necessarily at the same time, but also sharing across asynchronously. You post a question, you get your answers, absolutely. Social, online.
Bite-sized?
Bite-sized.
Not necessarily just online.
Yes. Absolutely. Boiling it down. Great example in front of you, the little book of inspiration. Superb little booklet, and that's bite-sized learning, isn't it? You can, well, obviously if you read my piece, you'll take away a lot from it, and 300 words of packed nuggets of information. But it doesn't have to be online, does it? It is online, as it happens, but also it's boiled down. We don't have to do everything through a course. Anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So and I think Clive Shepherd's doing some really interesting stuff about this right now. Clive Shepherd's always been about blended learning. He's never been about, oh, let's do this or that. And you get people who are real evangelists for a particular form of learning. Oh, it has to be mobile. It has to be this. And Clive quite rightly says, well, actually, let's just make sure we do the right thing to get the job done, improve performance. And so his focus is very much on, let's get the blend right. And now that we've got all these different types of delivery mechanisms and indeed social interaction coming forward, the blend, I think this year is going to be a very big year for blended learning, absolutely. I think people are recognizing it's not just a matter of a sandwich, bit of e-learning, classroom, bit of e-learning. Done right, it's much more of a journey than an event with some learning stuff at either end online. Lots of stuff there, and I think if we were having this conversation even 10 years ago, it would have been very different. I think that the trends we were seeing 10 years ago were much less vigorous than we are now. 10 years before that, what would that be? 94? That only seems like yesterday. How can that be 20 years ago? Is that right? It's extraordinary. There we are. I know for some people here that you weren't even alive in then. But for the rest of us, that seems extraordinary. Then, there would have been almost no trends at all, because things then had been carrying on the same way forever. We had a model of learning that was as it had always been. That's a theme I think we'll pick up as we go through the rest of this talk. All right, let's look at what I'd like to chat about. I'd like to cover off four things here, three big things and a fun thing at the end. So what are the big influences we've got on L&D from outside? And I think this is important because very often we get very caught up, but there's a sort of bubble. I know, because I chair a lot of these things, as John said. I chair a bunch of different things. We have people talking to ourselves, and we get convinced that all that matters is the L&D world. I'd like to take a step out and say, what's influencing us from outside? Because it's very big and it's very important. Secondly, one of the trends which we didn't talk about in this room, but actually is a very big trend at the moment, is talent. Everyone's talking about talent management. It went through a peak of interest about 7 years ago, slumped down into the trough of disillusionment on the Gartner hype cycle, but now it's absolutely coming back for very good reason. And I'd like to look at what talent means from the CEO's point of view, because what they mean, what we mean, and what gets done are three separate things. We'll probably spend quite a bit of time talking about technology and what I call, actually not what I call, but what is called now the consumer learner. I think that's a phrase I got from Todd Tauber at Burson. It's quite a nice term. I'll explain why I don't use that term. I'll use something else a bit later on. And then finally, let's look at what everyone's banging a drum about and is very excited about, but I don't think actually are proper trends for 2014, but are red herrings. All right, let's go on to the first one of these. What are our influences from outside L&D? As John says, I spend a lot of my time doing things which aren't practitioner-based. In other words, not going out there and really doing the job of L&D anymore, but rather reading reports. So here are some of the reports I've read recently, and I read these so you don't have to. Right? So you just turn up, get a breakfast, courtesy of Read Learning, and I can try to digest them into something that is meaningful for you. When this slide deck gets circulated, the references to all those reports and other things will be at the back, so you can go and pull down those references yourself. So you've got, hopefully, a little bit of a reservoir of information. I really don't believe that, no matter how much I may love myself, that you listening to me for 50 minutes is really going to change your lives. But hopefully, going off and reading some of that documentation might be an incremental step in personal development. All right, what are the big things that are taking place outside that are influencing us in L&D? Well, the really big thing that there are two really big things. And the first really big thing is this one here, that we've moved, and this is trite, I mean, we all know it, but it's just good to be reminded of it. We've moved away in the developed world from being a manufacturing economy. Basically, there are three lines on this graph. The one that's going down is manufacturing. The one that's going up is services. When I was a young man in the 1970s, I know it's hard to believe, in the 1970s, we actually made things. We made cars, we dug coal out of the ground, we did things which now don't happen in this country anymore. It happens abroad, typically. But the service and the high-skilled stuff is still very much done here. Of the 11 Formula One teams, 9 have their headquarters, their bases in the UK. Most of them in a very small area in the Midlands, because this is a centre for really high-quality, high-skilled manufacturing and an industry that runs into billions of pounds and employs 50,000 highly skilled engineers. So we don't think about Britain being a car manufacturer. We're not anymore. But on the other hand, we are a place of very highly skilled manufacturing that can't be outsourced. So the knowledge economy is definitely here. That's the first big trend. That's why I put that first. We know it, but I think it's worth reminding ourselves because those lines are only going to keep going in those same directions. Skills, talent are going to keep being important, and increasingly so, in the developed economies. I'll come on to what the second big trend is in a minute. The CIPD one, which I'd completely forgotten about, is the one that shows some of the great trends that are taking place that are affecting us from outside, like gender differences, the world being global, the increased number of small companies, the shift from manufacturing to skills-based work, and a decrease in political engagement by most people. Community-based activities have fallen off. We tend to be much more focused on work and family than on things outside either of those two. CIPD, good organisation, well worth downloading that document. Again, that'll be one of the references in here. All right. Another trend which intuitively we know, but it's difficult to put a number against, is this feeling that things are changing faster. It's harder just to stay in one place. It's harder to keep the business just doing what it's always done. We sort of feel that, especially if you're involved in running a business. But is that just because of things outside us, or is it real? Well, it is real. Deloitte have this organisation called the Centre for the Edge, and they've got this great report, Deloitte Shift, which again is referenced in the notes at the end. Business is less predictable than it used to be. This graph represents what's called the topple rate. The topple rate is a way of measuring how long an organisation can stay in its position in a hierarchy. And it's getting more difficult. It's getting so much more difficult that companies now will get knocked out of any position in a hierarchy much quicker than in the past. They're knocked out of their market positions 2 to 2.3 times as often as they were 50 years ago. In other words, to keep your position in a hierarchy, you just have to keep working harder to stand still. That's a number against that intuitive feeling that things are moving too fast. Another thing from outside is the fact that we're going global. What's this photograph of? Anybody got any ideas? Well, I'll give you a clue. If you can't read it, it says Halt Zonengrenze, which means halt, customs border. And it's an old sign from Germany from the east-west divide. Doesn't exist anymore. Because, of course, in 1989, the wall came down and the Iron Curtain tumbled in 1990 right across Europe. So borders are coming down. I really think that precipitated a lot of stuff we don't think about too much these days. But one of the things, I use that as a symbol to indicate the fact that we are increasingly working internationally. So, for example, one fact behind that, 60% of US companies will do more outside the US than they do at home by 2020. That's not very far away. And for the US in particular, where I think only something like 10% of people have a passport, that's a real shocking statistic. One other big trend from outside L&D that we're hearing about and which is affecting us, but we don't think about it because it's an incremental creeping change, is the extended enterprise. Now, I just want to ask you a question. Does that phrase mean anything to you, the extended enterprise? Does it? No? Shaking your heads? And have we got a strong feeling what the extended enterprise means? Extended enterprise refers to the fact that organizations no longer are bastions surrounded by a castle wall where everything's contained inside. They're increasingly porous and leaky at the edges. Increasingly, we rely on people that don't actually work for us. We rely on people perhaps in the supply chain coming in or in the distribution chain coming out. Classic case is car manufacturers. They outsource all of stuff coming in. They don't own the people who actually sell the cars. So they will have distribution networks of thousands of people that they're very reliant on to actually get that bit of metal to turn it into money. But they're not employed by the organization. And I thought, John, is our red light flashing? No, all right. I tell you what, I've done talks in a lot of different places. The poshest place is the manoir à quatre saisons, right? Normally the fire drill is, right, fire drill goes off, we'll go outside, across the car park, assembled by the wheelie bins, right? manoir à quatre saisons. You leave through the stone archway, in front of the Georgian building, across the gravel path, and assemble on the croquet lawn. I love that. And they do good food as well, so well worth going to the manoir if you get a chance, just for the fire drill. Okay, the extended enterprise, I thought, used to refer to just this idea that you had people inside the organisation, people outside the organisation. Deloitte have done a great job of really drilling down into this and looking at it, and you can't possibly read that. But basically, there's a whole spectrum of people that we're now reliant on in our organisation. We've got people who are on the payroll, we've got people who work in the supply chain, or people who work in joint ventures who are not on our payroll, but basically we're directly concerned with, people in joint venture, people in the supply chain or in the distribution arm. We've got people who are contractors, and then right over the other side, we've got people like customers, possibly even competitors, people in our peer network that we rely on one way and the other, influencers. All of those people affect our business in some way, and the old paradigm for L&D of being able to go out, put people through a training course because we control their destinies, simply is applying less and less. Increasingly, we are having to get people skilled up that we have very little control over one way and the other. So Deloitte put it this way, that by 2020, half the people you rely on won't actually work for your business, and that's very late. I was talking last week to a company based in Australia that's a Japanese organisation doing oil and gas manufacturing and refining. They already have more than half their people employed outside Japan. They have 27 countries they're operating in. For them, everything they do and some of the key people they rely on are not employed by the organisation. And 20% of the US workforce at the moment are independent freelancers already, and that's up from 6% in '89. So it's increasing all the time, the number of people that we're probably going to be relied on to get skilled up, but we have no direct control over. That's got to affect how we do our job. So to sum up that first big picture piece, global, fast-changing world, complicated, complex, difficult. It's what the Americans call VUCA. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That was a phrase that the American military brought out in the 1990s to try to explain the world they were living in once the Berlin Wall came down. They'd been used to having more tanks than the Russians, more missiles than the Russians, and suddenly they had all this stuff, but they had a different type of enemy out there that was very difficult to pin down. Fortunately, we don't have an enemy to pin down, but the world we work in is a VUCA world. The only thing I'd add to that is F. It's faster than it has ever been in the past, as we've seen from the topple rate. All right, so lots going on in the world in general that's affecting us directly. I want to drill down to two things now. Firstly, talent, because that's such a big topic at the moment, and we need to be aware of what our CEOs mean by it and what we think we mean by it, what we can do about it. And secondly, then I want to talk about technology. So, what do CEOs mean when they're talking about talent? I've been talking now for far too long. It's time to turn it back to you. What I'd like to do is for you to have a chat with the person next to you answering this question. What role does L&D play in your organisation's talent management? And it might be that the answer is, well, actually, it doesn't play any role at all. The answer might be, I've got no idea what talent management is. It might be, it runs talent management. These are all valid answers. So don't feel that you have to invent something, but I'd like you to explore this question very quickly with the person next to you for, let's say, 2 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, any thoughts about talent management? Anybody just throwing their hands up and saying, I've got no idea what talent management is? Anybody deeply involved in talent management in their organisations? Any thoughts? Well, I think that is actually a very pertinent question. I think let's explore that as we go on. For me, the metric is performance. And I would imagine that for most CEOs, the metric is, are people doing their job better? And then you work back from that. What's required to do the job? What's the match of skills against the job role? What's the requirement of, well, how do we ensure people's skills and knowledge are developed in order to do that? But actually, the metric is the key thing. I think for most CEOs, they have a different idea of the metric, which is probably down to numbers, how many people have we got, than managers and people in L&D who are probably saying, actually, we need people who can really do the job. So I think the question of the metric is a very good one. So that's one good observation on this. Any other thoughts about talent with L&D? And that's a really common situation that you have this view of big talent, the star players, the Ronaldos of this world, the superstar players, and you have a special team to look after them, and you've got everybody else. And there's a gap between the two, and the result is you have this fractured approach to long-term planning for skills. It doesn't have to be that way. GE recently appointed a new CEO and had 6 people lined up in succession planning, ready to take that place from within the organisation, because they take the whole thing very seriously and they take internal development of talent totally seriously. I'm not saying that you don't, of course, but what I'm saying is they take it so seriously they have this continuous view right the way from people being recruited to potentially being a CEO. Let's push on then. I think these 2 points are really good examples of some of the confusion that exists around talent at the moment. CEOs, we know, think that talent is very important. We know because we ask them, and they come up with quotes like 54%. Sorry, let me just check I've got the right slide here. Just, because I know nobody's going to tell me, so I'm going to check for myself. 70% of executives say talent development is either important or extremely important. That's according to Forbes. PwC interviewed 1,330 CEOs, and they said the first thing stopping growth was tax regimes, and the second thing stopping growth was availability of key skills. Whenever we ask top people in the past 3 to 4 years, what's going on in your organisation, what's really important, what inhibits growth, the answer is uniform, that it is skills, stroke talent, stroke human capital management. The conference board asked over 700 people, CEOs of large organisations, what's the key thing that is on your list of things to do in 2013? Number 1 was human capital, number 2 was operational excellence, but human capital on that list, you probably can't read it, is 2.4 on a weighted list. The next thing is 2.1, I think, behind it, yeah? So that's like winning the 100 metres by 10 yards. It's way out ahead of everything else as far as the CEOs are concerned. By the way, I'm not quite sure what these CEOs are doing. They seem to spend all their time answering surveys, a bit like me. They don't actually do anything, because we've asked these questions again and again of CEOs, and here's a CEO report, again saying the same thing from 2011, when this really started coming through. And again, Lloyd's Risk Register asked several hundred top CEOs, and these are not piffling companies. These are 500 companies, half of which have a turnover of more than $500 million. What's the top thing inhibiting you this year? And they're saying the top risks this year, well, the number 2 on the list is skills shortages, being able to get hold of the right talent, build it up, and bring it through. Now, this should be great news for learning and development. We should be pumping our fists in the air because, after all, if they want skills, we are surely the people to provide it. Do they think so? I'm not sure they do, because at the same year, the Economist Intelligence Unit asked, again, a bunch of 350 CEOs, what part of your organisation is the most agile? Which is the part of the organisation that's responding best to the needs of the organisation, helping it do better? Okay, so of the departments listed on here, of course, training and L&D isn't listed, but of the departments listed on here, which is top of the list? Which is the most agile? You probably can't read it, but you can guess it's sales and marketing. They're the ones that are really helping the business do their job. Learning and development, or rather HR, which is on the list, on a scale of least agility, scores 31. Legal, risk, and compliance. Remember, this is how agile you are. Legal, risk, and compliance scores 30. How bad do we have to be worse, to be less agile than legal, risk, and compliance, for goodness sake? And of course, this isn't the truth, right? This is the perception of the CEOs. This is what they think. And unfortunately, what we've got here is a story where, on the one hand, skills are crucial. On the other, yeah, HR, they're not doing it for us. And that's why we have special teams developing talent for our top leadership, because the L&D, they do everybody else. So when CEOs talk about talent, they're talking about, I think, something that's the people at the top echelons of the organisation, usually, not always, but usually. And they don't see us necessarily as the people who can deliver to meet that gap. I'm going to show you a slide now which is impossibly complicated and which you can't possibly read, but I will point out 2 bits on it that illustrate what the people at software organizations are really thinking. It's from a good survey by Boston Consulting Group about the future of HR. And it has, as you might expect, from a consultancy group, a 2x2 grid. But that's not enough. It's got circles, colours, and everything else on it. Let's have a look at that exciting grid. Goodness me. It's not the sort of thing you want to look at first thing on a Monday morning. Basically, what it's saying is, where's the capability low? Where's the priority high? How important is it? Off the scale, top right-hand corner, is managing talent. Again, people are saying this is the most important thing for us. But strangely enough, somewhere in the middle here is becoming a learning organization. For me, that sums it up. That talent's really important. Oh, yeah, we're doing this learning thing too. There's a physical gap between them, as far as most people see. So when CEOs are talking about talent, they're not talking about what we understand, getting people to do their jobs better. They're talking about something else. And to sum that up, you can just go to Google Images and ask them to look for business talent. If you look at business talent, I tried looking up just talent in Google Images, but you get a lot of things you probably don't want to show to people. Business talent, you get a lot of images which are all about individuals being plucked out from a line out. Yes, you're the one. What images do you think you get if you ask for adult learning? What do you get, do you reckon? Is it, yes, you're the one? No. It's a lot of people sitting down in classrooms. That's the gap in a nutshell. Why? Because we can make it happen, but the problem is that we have a culture that is entirely around learning, being people sat down and listening, because for the first 15 years of our lives, that's what we do. And we have done for the past 100 and plus years. So that's what learning is as far as most CEOs are concerned. One of the big things I think we have to do is transform that perception. Technology and consumer learning. I'm going to crack on because there's more quotes here that you can't possibly read. You can read them when you get the slide deck. I said there were two big trends. One big trend is this business of moving to a knowledge economy. The second big trend is this. Anybody remember what this is? Shout it out. Who's this? And what event is that? Tim Berners-Lee. When? Where? Where is he? Olympics, closing ceremony. He's in the house in the middle of the arena, and he types out a tweet saying, "This is for everyone." Good call. That tweet gets recycled over the internet over 10,000 times in a matter of minutes. Most number of retweets I've had is 67. I'm not Tim Berners-Lee. I don't know how many of you remember what it was like to put a letter in an envelope and put a stamp on it. But 10,000 people being reached is a lot of envelopes, a lot of stamps, and a lot of paper cuts on your tongue when you do that. Transformed world. We're in a world now where information is free and frictionless. It goes like that, and suddenly everybody's got it. And we don't even think about it. 20 years ago, absolutely impossible to imagine this. Now, we just don't bat an eyelid. The web has transformed the way we are able to share information. And if we're able to share information, that means the way we learn at work is very different. Technology is definitely driving some big trends. So let's look at how people learn at work. Here are some people at work. Honestly, are these people at work? Have you ever worked with people like this? Seriously? These are people at work. I've spent a lot of my time working in small startup organizations, and that's what it looks like. You've got people with their shoes off, people having lunch, two people sharing a desk. You've got stuff in the litter bins there. I don't even want to guess what it is. You've got a Nerf gun there. It's smelly, it's busy, it's crowded. Everything's happening all the time. These people are not taking 5 days out of their lives to go and attend a course. They might take a day out or 2 days out, especially if it was read learning, of course. But these people are learning on the job, learning fast, learning from each other. In fact, that's not a bad picture for learning, adults learning at work. And how are they doing it? They're doing it using a bunch of tools that we're all familiar with, and you cool down all the time. And these tools are consumer tools rather than centrally produced tools, typically. And of course, you can tell from these what people are using them for. Google is the world's greatest performance support tool. First thing you go to when you want to know how to do something is you go to Google, typically. It suggests something. You type in how to. On google.com, you type in how to. What's the suggestion? Go on. Well, it's how to tie a tie. Obviously, you and I, sophisticated people, would want to know how to tie a bow tie, but on google.com, it's how to tie a tie, because, yeah, it is. You check it out. I can see you're going to get on the... There's no hiding place. Check it out now. On google.com, because American boys leave high school without having tied a tie, they go for a job interview, and they need to know how to do it. They don't ask their dad, they ask Google. So it's the performance aid that we first turn to. And of course, it says other things as well. If you in England, if you type on co.uk, how can I? It says how can I. I think the suggestion is how can I lose weight. In Germany, in the UK, it's how can I make pancakes. That may be because Shrove Tuesday's coming up. How can I make pancakes? In Germany, I think it's how can I lose weight. And that may suggest some reason for the relative performance of the British and the German economies. We're busy just getting lardy and they're all shedding the weight and being terribly effective at work. Why are people going onto the internet and doing this stuff? Because they want to find stuff out. The bottom right-hand corner here, there's a little symbol, which is the Rudder-Finn Index. The Rudder-Finn Index is run by an organisation, Rudder-Finn, in the States, which asks people, they set up this intent index. What were you intending to do when you went onto the internet? What was in your mind? What were you trying to do? And they give people 6 choices. Was it learning? Was it advocacy? Was it socialising? Was it having fun? Which, of course, on the internet covers a lot of bases. Was it expressing yourself? Was it doing business? Was it shopping? Of those 7 things, or those 6 things, 7 things, what is it that you think most people say they want to do when they go onto the internet? Any choices? Fun? Shopping? It's actually learning. Learning is the thing that most people say they want to do when they go onto the internet. And if you show that to most L&D people, most L&D people's reaction is firstly shock. How dare they? I'm not involved in this process. And secondly, it's, well, they're not really learning anything. They're just finding stuff out. But you know what? They don't care. For them, learning, finding stuff out, doing the job better is what matters. So this business of social tools, or tools that aren't formal, aren't pushing stuff out to people, is a massive trend. And Jane Hart, who I know you're familiar with, publishes her top 100 tools, asks people what are they using for learning. The answer is they're using informal tools, personal tools, consumer tools. This is where the idea of the consumer learner comes from. It's people whose expectations and whose ways of learning is driven by their consumer behaviour. Of the top 20 tools in her list that's compiled by asking hundreds of people and has been done for now, for I think 8 years, the top 20, I think there's one on there, Moodle, which is what I'd call a regular LMS-style centralised push tool. The rest of it is all self-service tools for finding out information yourself. So at the end of last year, I put out a question on my website. I polled people. I said, well, what are the top things that you think are going to be important in the coming year? Bearing in mind that we've got a situation where we've got people increasingly doing stuff for themselves, what are the trends for learning next year? I gave people a choice of, I think it was 12 things, 11 particular choices, and then an other section. You can't read that, but you'll see the results when you get the deck out. People in the other section suggested 2 other things, one of which was that gamification was going to be important, the other of which was that showing the value of learning was going to be increasingly important. I think that's both true. And what I did was I looked at the 13 things. The point is that everything got a vote from somebody. Hundreds of people responded. Everybody thought that one of these things at least was going to be important this year. And I put them into 3 buckets. And I said, well, of course I can stand in front of anybody and say there are going to be 13 big trends in 2014, but really, 13 trends are no trends at all. That's just a lot of noise. It's scattershot. But looking at them, they definitely fall into 3 buckets of technology trends that are going to be important this year. Technology and other trends. And I said that those 3 buckets really fall into, those 13 facets fall into 3 buckets, which are the delivery is changing and it's widening. There's the rise in the middle here of what I call the networked individual. Some people, as I say, like to call it the consumer learner, but I say the networked individual. I'll tell you why. They don't care if they're learners or not. They're people doing what they want to do. And I think we need to shift our attention and our thoughts from referring to people as learners to think of them as individuals. They're going to get the job done. They're going to learn stuff whether we're getting involved or not. So let's think of them as individuals trying to do stuff. So I call them networked individuals. But their behavior is driven by their experience as consumers. And finally, there's this demanding business, the business that wants the talent management, wants knowledge management, is facing increasing regulation, and wants to see the value of what we're doing. So those three, for me, are the big trends of learning in 2014 from a technological point of view. So what I've tried to do in this whirlwind tour is look at what are the big influences that we've got coming to us from the outside. And I think we know that for me it's the knowledge economy and the internet are the two big things. Information is fast and frictionless and free, and that transforms what we do. If in the past we were gatekeepers of knowledge, we can't be anymore because you look it up on Google. Second thing is that when CEOs are talking about talent, they're not talking about the talent that we, as we understand it, which is how do we get people to do their jobs better with a metric of performance right the way across the organization. So we start here and we go right the way through to the top. Talent is seen by most people at the top of organizations as being something that is, they're most concerned about the people at the top. They know they have to do something about everybody else, but there's a gap between the two. And I very much see our role as being shifting that perception. And finally, technology and the consumer learner, we know there are these three trends. We've got maturing delivery. So we've got mobile, we've got video, we've got all those things that we talked about right at the beginning as trends. That's just part of our life. So we absolutely have to deal with mobile, online, on-demand, learning nuggets, all the stuff we talked about at the beginning. That's just a matter of fact. Delivery is now done that way. But as well as that, we have to look at and help connected individuals learn the way they want to learn. Plus, we have to deal with CEOs, talk to their agenda, work with the demanding business, and show value. Okay. You may never see me again. I could say what I want to say, couldn't I? Learning trends this, learning trends that. Of course, the good thing about Twitter is you know I'm Donald H. Taylor, and you can always have a go at me in December when you say, Don, in February you said all this, and it was lies. Something else was really important. Well, please feel free to do so, because we all need to be kept to order. Absolutely. No problem with that. But I'm going to call out what I think are the red herrings, the things that a lot of people are talking about as trends that I don't think really are going to be trends. MOOCs. Now, everyone's saying that massive online open courses are the way of the future. I agree. Actually, I think they're transformational. But I don't think they're transformational in the way everyone's saying they're going to be transformational. Everyone's banging the drum for people don't have to go to university anymore. This is the new way of doing courses. And I think MOOCs are fantastic, but they're not what we think they're going to be. And I'm not going to tell you what I think they are going to be. I wrote a blog about a year ago. I do think we're moving towards a very different model of online education from the public sector and the private sector overlapping, but I think MOOCs are only the first image of this. Shout away. MOOC, massive, open, online course, received massive amounts of publicity about 15 months ago when Udacity and Coursera got their first lots of funding. Go and Google it, of course, and you will find yourself pitched into a maelstrom of debate and antagonism on both sides, with some people saying it's the death of higher education, other people saying it is the new way higher education is going to be. I don't believe it's either of those two things. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's going to transform learning, but not as we know it, in a way that Twitter has, and other social tools have transformed learning in ways that we find it very difficult to have predicted when they first became available. Gen Y. I know Gen Y, this, millennials, that, natives, digital, whatever. Does anybody else have a problem with the whole Gen Y thing? I do, because I think next year half the workforce is going to come from the millennial generation. half the workforce. So when it gets to half of the workforce being a particular demographic, generalizing across them, I think, becomes increasingly meaningless. We can't say they are all like this. I prefer the definition made by Brian Solis when he spoke at Learning Technologies last month, when he said it's not about Gen Y, it's not about silver surfers or digital natives, it's about Gen C, it's about people who've grown up connected, or people who are connected, people who've become connected. People who are happy to get online and share stuff. So I think Gen Y is a set of characteristics which can apply to people of any age, and I think that's worth looking at, but we're too happy sticking a label on it and saying, yeah, we've got to look after the millennials. Overhyped devices. I love my iPad. I have 2 iPads. I've got one which doesn't work properly anymore because, of course, Apple keep bringing out new operating systems, so it slows down, and then guess what? You've got to fork out another 500 quid. There we are, 500 quid for a new iPad. There you go. So I love them so much I've got 2, but they are not the answer to the world's problems. They are a tool. And unfortunately, we do tend to latch on to particular things. The iPad is the answer to everything. No, it isn't. Let's have a battle. Who cares? The devices don't matter. What matters is the people and the performance. The devices will sort themselves out. In 2 years' time, we'll look back at it and say, why on earth were we having any sort of fight about iPads and tablets? And Donald Clark has this fantastic phrase, the tablet Taliban, for people who want to go out and convert the world to doing everything on a tablet. And finally, output obsession. I strongly believe that generally in L&D we are too closely focused on the things we produce. I'm not saying we shouldn't take them very seriously and do a great job producing great courses, but that's not our job. Our job is improving people's performance and helping them develop. And we can do that through output, courses, etc., but we can do it through other things as well. Through social, and in particular by helping people learn better, something which we don't talk a great deal about, but actually it's probably the greatest challenge I think we have as a community going forward. All right, so in December, feel free to come back to me and say, Don, all those things that you said were trends turned out to be rubbish, and those red herrings, they're all really important. And you can give me a good hammering on Twitter. Feel free to. After all, we do live in a world, thank goodness, of increased transparency where people are held accountable for their actions. The age of the guru is dead. We are living in an age of social community and working together, and long may it continue. The best people we have to learn from are each other. I hope we can continue learning from each other. I am Donald H. Taylor on Gmail, LinkedIn, Twitter, and everything else, so please do look me up and let's connect. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time this morning.
So, up next, what we thought we'd give the audience here an opportunity to do is ask any questions that you might have, either direct to Don or to myself or to Matthew Piddington, Head of Sales at Reed Learning, or Sharon, who's Organizational Program Director. She's the most talented person we have in learning here. So direct all the real hard questions to Sharon, because she's the one who makes things happen. Absolutely. I'm just trying to divert them away from me. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
Can I just add a point to your last slide? You talked about output. It seems to be reverting back to what does the chief executive want? He wants outcomes, not outputs.
Well, that's a great
And that is the metric we need to be focusing on.
Outcomes, not outputs. What's your name?
John Parker.
Okay. I'm not going to credit you, John, but I'll have you in mind every time I use that phrase. No, John, of course I'll say, it was John's idea. That's great, yeah. Outcomes, not outputs. Great, yes.
I also, if I may, John, I think one of the interesting things out of Don's talk today is just the sense of people can get information. If we're not providing the stuff that they want, they will go and get it. That actually, from making sure your staff, your talent develop in the right way, means that making sure they engage in the right way and helping them understand why they should engage is probably the most important thing you can do initially. The learning will happen. Whether you control it or not, the learning will happen. So control the engagement, make sure that happens in the right way, make sure they understand why they're doing it. Also make sure that when they go back into the workplace, when they've done they've done their engagement and learnt whatever it is, even if it's 5 minutes, there is some mechanism to support it being applied back in the workspace, because that gets the outcome.
Hopefully. But Sharon, are people actually, let's have a reality check. Is this actually happening? Are people really focusing on the outcomes, or are they still really focused on the outputs?
The short answer, I definitely think they are focused on outcomes. With the conversations I've had recently,
right.
I mean, really, I represent, I guess, a small proportion of what is out there in the world, but there is definitely a trend towards really drilling down to actual behaviours that you see.
Right.
There's huge conversations about our ability to observe, and this, because there are so many distractions in the world, there are so many things that you have to keep your eyes on.
Yeah.
You sort of miss the detail sometimes. So people have taken to going back into the workplace if they weren't in it, because some people have sort of removed themselves from that. And they're watching the people who need the support that you give them. So it's changed the conversations that they've had with those line managers, if they have line managers. It's about I think for us in L&D, it's about us asking the questions that get them to observe. We sort of lose sight sometimes of what the actual end product is, and you've mentioned it's about one person maybe. It's about individual people actually doing things that then make a difference. So yesterday I was doing this and it wasn't very effective, or the conversation didn't feel too good. I have an interaction with somebody. It may even be a conversation with a coach or someone who asked a coaching type question. You then go out into the workplace, you're made accountable. Yep. Maybe someone goes back to you and says, oh, how did that go? What was your feeling about it? What was your experience? Well, actually, on reflection, I just changed a word, or there was a little piece in there. I was more observant about what was coming back to me. And there's been a real difference. That's a tiny piece, actually. But if lots of us are doing that with lots of people, you're dipping in all the time, you're having a great conversation, there is this groundswell, I think. And then you look back. I think it does take time, so don't expect big change in a month or 2 months, depending on how big your company is. But it's about then feeling this groundswell, but it's definitely about getting right in at the level that needs change, and specific, really specific conversations.
Any other questions?
I think one of the key challenges that we as a learning solutions provider get pushed for all of the time is that point around outcomes. So helping organisations make the business case for learning and development. And often, as a provider that's spent a lot of time looking at this, it's that thin line of not over-promising and under-delivering, but making sure that we're realistic with the outputs and outcomes that we can position from our programs. Because often, I think organisations can get caught up with positioning an outcome as a result of something that isn't associated with the L&D function. And that's something that we need to be very careful and mindful about. And also encouraging the organisations themselves to be proactively thinking about the outcomes that they would like to see out of any learning intervention. And often the most innovative suggestions come to us without that thinking at the start of the process. And I think that's a two-way exchange.
So you've been doing the clever bit and passing it back.
Yeah, go on.
I'm interested actually in how far we should look at what's happening in education. Yeah. You mentioned it briefly. Yeah. And it is still very much from experience, or from the little I know, it is about kids sitting in the classroom. Although they're getting much more creative, teachers are being really pushed to be creative in the way that they teach. But of course, they are a group of people that will be coming into our businesses. They're the future of what we are creating. So how much should we look at what's happening in education, how they teach them, how they're asking them to do extracurricular, because there's a huge amount more now of extracurricular than I ever remember, or ever bothered to get involved in, probably. Should we also keep an eye on that so that we're ready for the type of people, the type of learning experience that they've had, and how should that affect us?
Well, I think there's two things here. I think there's a lot of research being done in education, which unfortunately doesn't always percolate through to practice. There's a lot of great research that's done because you've got people that you can really do proper scientific controlled experiments on. So you can actually, and I'm involved with one of these at the moment with a primary school, involved in a very simple activity to find out how much encouraging Year 5 pupils to reflect improves their ability to learn. It turns out the effect is absolutely massive. And I won't go into the details of it, but the research is there. The research has been done by the Sutton Trust, and we can learn, and it's now being further tested out. We're doing an experiment starting in September across a range of schools. So the research is there. We know that clear targets, reflection, and feedback are the three things that really affect children's learning. Guess what? They're probably pretty important to affecting adults' learning as well. We don't suddenly change when we hit 18. So we should probably take advantage of some of that research and put it to work ourselves. So from that point of view, I think education, we have a lot to learn from. In terms of wanting to know what people are like when they come into the workplace and working with that, I'm not sure that things are going to change so quickly that we have to worry about it, to be honest. My daughter's in Year 7 at school. They've all now got iPad minis and they use them, but guess what? They use them just like everybody else. And my daughter last night was teaching my wife how to use Candy Crush. My wife had discovered it on her own accord, I have to say, but so they know it. I left the house, my daughter was on the sofa reading the book piece, so she's not completely addicted to this stuff yet. I think we can expect the technology to come through, and I'm delighted to say group work to come through. So I think in educational practice, we don't have to adjust too much what we're doing. I do believe there's a lot to be learned from having conversations, and in particular from the research, the great research that goes on in the educational space. That's one answer. You're sneaking off. Cheers. Send Colin that book directly, okay? Send Colin the book directly and he'll be delighted to receive it. All right, cheers. Anybody else who goes out, I'll also mutter something random to them as well.
Any other questions? Oh, we've got a quiet audience today, Jeff.
They're thinking, they're all taking advantage. And goodness me, how often do we get out in the workplace and have the chance to really reflect? It's a good opportunity to chill out and reflect on stuff. And we've even got the sun to come out for you as well. That's lovely.
I'm just interested, actually, what are the real big challenges facing people? The really big challenges, the ones that you go home and struggle with and you don't find immediate answers to. What are those things?
I mean, 2 years ago, the answer to that from everybody would be budget. We're being asked to do more with less. But I'm getting the sense now that may still be an issue, but I'm getting the sense it's less of an issue now. So I'd love to know as well, yeah. What are the big challenges people are facing in the workplace right now?
There's one, I'm a team coach and I get crazy demands on just the ambience. The relationships are not as good as they could be.
The relationships between
at work, just right. the basic interpersonal exchanges sometimes get in the way of getting people into doing the best. That's one thing I see a lot, but I'm biased again.
Well, you may see a lot of it. I think it is a problem. In fact, I know it's a problem. Is it something that we should be tackling?
So I just wanted to comment on your points about reflection and feedback, particularly feedback. I know what's going on in the schools at the moment because some work I've been doing there, and it's been a real job to teach youngsters to give feedback properly, particularly in this country, but actually in the Western world. Once you're in work, giving feedback in any way at all is often seen as outright criticism. And I think if there's a challenge in L&D at the moment, it's learning ourselves how to give feedback, how to ask for feedback,
Mm-hmm.
because we seem to think that happy sheets, even if they're electronic, is feedback, and it's not. And learning how to ask for feedback, and then how to interpret it
Right.
so that you do something constructive with it. So my comment on your point would be, okay, so let's get inside feedback a bit further, because it's a whole art form that we broadly don't understand, and the schools are also struggling with.
And it's not necessarily something that requires technology, it's usually a conversation. And how much do you think is our job to help the organisation develop its feedback better? You have to give the microphone back now, Joe.
Sorry. I think it is our job to do
Yeah.
that, because I think technology can help. I think the use of specific questionnaires, learning how to produce quick, accurate, effective questionnaires using Google Forms or something like that can be a really quick way of getting data into the hands of managers from the learning and development department, so that you're not just arguing from a perspective of feelings and sort of mushy stuff, but you actually lay some data on the table and say, now we've got to go and look deeper.
Sometimes that data can be quite powerful. I was part of an organisation that bought a training company in London, and I think I can now reveal this. The emotional scars have almost healed. It was in 1999. I went in there, and it had been run by a very charismatic leader, a small group of 35 people. I was suddenly the guy in charge. I was reporting to somebody in the UK who was reporting to somebody in Seattle, and I was seen as being the epitome of the evil empire. They asked, as part of a general company-wide bit of research, what do you think, anonymously, which is always something you want to hear, anonymously, what do you think of your managers? So I flew to the States for this general company meeting wide of all the top people. In the hotel room, I opened up the paperwork, and honestly, I thought, no, they've got this the wrong way round. Where it says 1, surely they mean 5. 1, 5, 1, 5. I swear I was the most reviled person, not just in that office in London, but in the entire organisation. So that was good feedback, very strong. I'm not sure I learned very much from the course that I attended that day, actually. But I did then take on board the action. The simple thing I did was I moved from my office out into the open plan office and started having proper conversations with people. 2 years later, I resigned my job and I went off to set up my own company. And I have to tell you, when I said to the assembled gang, guys, I'm going to have to leave you now, a couple of people actually cried when I left. I'm not sure if it's joy or... Anyway, I think I turned them around over the period of 2 years by that simple thing. So feedback through questionnaires can be tremendously powerful, yes.
I think one of the biggest challenges we have around feedback is actually finding the opportunity to create the time, the dedicated time on a regular basis to actually have that environment in a safe environment where an honest exchange can take place. And I think in today's changing world, people are being expected to do more and more in a multitude of different ways, and that is a challenge for us. And one of the priorities for managers, learning and development, and individuals is to create that opportunity and really push for it.
If I could say actually about feedback, I think for us in L&D, the really key thing is that we have to have our eyes on the now and our eyes on where it takes us, almost in the same breath sometimes. And I relate, when I talked yesterday actually to someone about feedback, I was talking about the sort of parent-child example. So I may not do this brilliantly all the time, but the example would be that I have a responsibility as a parent to understand what my children do now and what I do with them will bring a huge consequence for them when they're allowed out into the adult world on their own. They won't be allowed out into the adult world for a very long time. My husband won't ever allow my daughter out at all, I don't think.
Certainly not dressed like that, for goodness sake.
Definitely not dressed like that. But there is this thing, I think we have to play this dual role where you understand the developmental consequence of saying something now, which to the receiver may feel harsh, even if you've said it sensitively, constructively, you've used all the right words, but we have to, I sort of feel I'm in a space where I'm holding my breath. Do you know what? I've said this now, you'll feel a bit of pain. I don't mind that. I'm not you. I separated myself from you. I can be empathetic. I can build other support networks for them, because I may not be able to support them at that point because I've delivered that, but it was honest. It was focused on what you need to do. It's not just me having an emotional outburst.
Yeah.
It's all the good qualities of feedback. So you go away now, you reflect on that. Maybe we have a conversation at another point. But I know actually that the consequence of me doing this is that you will be in a better place in 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 1 year. It may take time sometimes, but this is part of the journey. And I try to remind myself that, because feedback is really important. It's a huge consequence you can have on people, but it may not be immediate, and you won't get the feel good. You have to be prepared sometimes to have just been the deliverer who did it best, and someone else will reap the benefits. And so for me, I always try to think about, for my children, I'm doing it now, they don't like it, it's really painful, but you know what? When you get out and do something, or when you're with other people, you will thank me, you will. And I just think it's this position, you have to feel it's okay to be uncomfortable about that sometimes. So do it as long as you've done it well, check with other people, get someone else to support them, and then you'll reap the benefits longer term. We have to be a bit patient sometimes. I think we want things too immediately, and it takes time.
Also, we don't have to want to be liked. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a theme in L&D that because a lot of people step into it because they're good trainers, and it's a great feeling being in front of a class and being the person who knows everything and you want to be liked. That's actually that's fine in certain environments, but actually for feedback it's the worst possible thing. What you need to be doing is really focus, as you say, on the other person.
Any last questions? No. I have, yeah.
So is there a danger while technology is brilliant for bringing lots of people together from lots of different places, that when it comes to things like feedback and interpersonal communication, that actually becomes a lot less personal because we're too reliant on technology as we become more global?
Just to recap that question, is there a danger that technology is going to threaten our ability to be effective interpersonally? Yeah? Well, like Louis Walsh on X Factor, when Louis is seeing somebody, he always said, I love the show, but my head says one thing, my heart says another, and he always uses that phrase. And I feel the same thing. My heart says no. People will always be people who are interpersonal and able to interact, because that's what we are, we're human beings. My head says, looking at how people are interacting, I think two things will happen. I think there'll be a common grammar or language of interaction that will be slightly different in the future. People will be okay with communication being shorter, perhaps even quite abrupt by the standards that we might expect today, because the nature of how we communicate with each other through things like texting and other social media is just truncated. So I think my head says that side of things, the grammar of it will change. But I think if we take a step back from that, we can say that actually what we're doing with it, provided we understand the language, won't change. People will still need people, will still interact in the same ways, and will still be, as we've always been, human beings who need friendship and who need to be able to interact with people in order to survive. So I think given that basic human need, my heart is right that no, things won't change, but my head is also right that the actual interaction between people and the way it's done, superficially, will change quite dramatically. Is that an answer, or is it just me straddling the fence brilliantly? Bit of both. No, I think it's true. I think, if you look at I'll leave it there, because I think it's a really, really important point. Let's continue the conversation over a coffee afterwards. The fact is, people can't change so much they won't be able to communicate properly, or will stop being people.
I think that's probably an apt point for us to conclude. I do have one observation on why do CEOs rate talent the most? Because any CEO who's worth his salt, even a lowly MD such as me, knows that you need to surround yourself by talented people.
That's true.
And that's why I'm surrounded by you guys, stood up here answering the questions. With that, let's finish up the formal questions. There'll be coffee served, drinks served. Please take this opportunity to network, ask questions, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Good to see you.